a very warm welcome to everyone joining today's webcast, Packaging Sustainability. That would either be a very early good morning to anyone joining from the UK or an afternoon if you're in Singapore. So let's begin without further ado. So just some brief introductions before we begin. My name is Natalie Shepherd and I'm a data and analytics consultant at Thorogood. I'm joined today by my colleague James, and he is also a data and analytics consultant here at Thorogood. So just a brief overview of our agenda today. We're going to begin with an introduction to Thorogood, just for those of you who might not be familiar with us. And then I'll set the stage just generally on the urgent need for climate action, and then the opportunity actually presented by digital transformation. And then we'll move on to using data within that issue and the power or challenges that come with that. I'm then going to hand over to James and he'll take you through a few more specifics to do with packaging waste. So for those of you in the virtual room who may not be familiar with Thorogood, we are a specialist independent consultancy. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about what independent means a bit later on, but we operate globally within the data and AI niche. Our products generally fall into the categories of data engineering, data science, and data visualization, but essentially our business is helping customers to make sense of their data using analytics solutions, and that can include data and technology strategies and roadmaps, end-to-end implementation of cloud solutions, or user empowerment and analytics services. But our niche and approach is firmly rooted in understanding the business goals of customers and then using the capabilities of technology to meet these goals. So because of that, our customers and their business objectives are really at the forefront of our approach. So just now I mentioned that we were an independent consultancy, and I'll just give you a little bit more context about what that actually means. So essentially, rather than just working with one technology and thus having our solutions slightly constrained to using that software, we do actually partner with an array of key tech vendors in the data and AI sphere, and that could be within front-end and back-end analytics. And we actually find that this independence is helpful because having consultants trained in these different technologies means that we can actually understand the customers that we're working with, irregardless of their current data landscape. So it doesn't really matter what their kind of status is. When we come in, we kind of can work it out from there. And as well as that, it does actually allow us to confidently identify and recommend what we think is the best fit for customers to kind of suit their very specific business requirements. We don't rely on trying to squeeze or fit one technology into that need where it may not necessarily be best placed. So obviously, today's workshop will be focusing on sustainability, and that can use an array of these different technologies. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about what we mean during the webcast. Without further ado, let's get into the sustainability. So the business of sustainability. So I'm just going to put all of these builds up on the screen just so it's easier. But as many of you will be aware, particularly if you're joining this webcast on sustainability, it's becoming a huge cornerstone of the global response to the climate crisis. And recent months and years have seen a surge in the urgency of calls to action. And environmental challenges and warnings appear as a centerpiece of current affairs on almost a daily basis at this point, and rightly so. So organizations are now facing increasing pressure to determine their position on sustainability from all sides. Sustainability and increasing urgency of need for climate action is playing an ever greater role across the political landscape. So it's kind of filtering down into that high level authority. And governments are actually increasing business reporting requirements and regulations. But alongside that, we have pressure coming up from below as consumers are demanding more sustainable options. So not only do corporations produce their own emissions and impact on the environment within kind of their day-to-day business, I'm sure we're all familiar with statistics such as the fact that 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions. They've been that's kind of been in the news pretty regularly. But they also have a really powerful influence over consumer behavior because choices and options for consumers trickle down into a reliance on how corporations kind of behave within the sphere. So encouraging consumers to pick sustainable options is not really any good if corporations are not producing them or actually making them financially accessible. So with that in mind, international guidelines, targets and policy are invoking the role of businesses and corporations more and more, following the kind of recognition of this direct and indirect role of corporations as one of the largest contributors to global emissions and the climate crisis as a whole, really. So I'll just go into some relevant examples. We've got this IPCC report, which is statements for kind of policymakers. And then we also have the COP26 conference in Glasgow that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. And one of the key kind of points of that, number 4, is that we have to work together to accelerate action to tackle the climate crisis through collaborations of governments, businesses and civil society, which I think in a nutshell really illustrates how everyone has a role in this, and kind of we all need to think about our position, and that does include big organizations. And then this third image here is the Sustainable Development Goals, which were put in place by the United Nations to replace the MDGs, or the Millennium Development Goals, which, as the name suggests, were created in the year 2000. We didn't do very well with achieving these, and a lot of research suggests that this is actually a result of their reliance on financial aid from governments and individual consumers changing their behaviour just by themselves and through moral obligations. And that's why a defining feature of the SDGs is an increased focus on corporate responsibility, with the actual inclusion of financial incentives to drive compliance. So this kind of shift is transforming the way that businesses are addressing sustainability in their value chain from a political and a social context. Companies basically have no choice but to consider their role and their place in response to a sustainable revolution. So that's kind of a bit of context on what impetus companies have to get involved with sustainability generally. So go into some of the challenges that these large organizations are going to face in these goals. The intersection of data with sustainability promises a platter of fresh challenges to organizations who want to introduce new sustainability targets. And these are going to vary depending on your organization's particular goals and current progress. So one of the first challenges that I'm going to mention is standardization. So sustainability does, despite the constant kind of discourse about sustainability in the media and other contexts, sustainability does remain a relatively emerging field. And because of that, it does continue to suffer from a pretty marked lack of standardization. So just to name a few examples, the definition of concepts like net zero and carbon neutrals are not consistent, and nor are they really regulated properly. And there is no single governing body that determines what it means to actually be a green business. This inconsistency can leave what almost becomes slight loopholes for organizations in allowing things like greenwashing, which really is a term I'm sure you're all familiar with, for when companies are accused of using sustainability kind of more of as a marketing tool, when in reality they maybe aren't taking quite enough meaningful action. And that's something we've seen circulate a lot recently as people begin to uncover these slight failings in businesses' response to sustainability. So moving on, let's look at the decision between reducing or offsetting carbon emissions. So offsetting carbon emissions might seem like a quick and pretty easy step, pretty quick fix, I guess, to becoming sustainable, but it's not really equivalent to reduction. Investing in an offset program that protects trees is, at the end of the day, less meaningful than producing less carbon for those trees to absorb. So in short, it's not really a sustainable option, if you will. Arguably, some of the greatest challenges are actually surrounding how to implement sustainability in your organization. So when you set your sustainability goals, do you start by setting short-term or long-term goals? So again, that could be to do with offsetting or reduction. And what areas of your business do you focus more on making eco-friendly? It could be operations like the energy and water used by your offices, or your suppliers and the raw materials in your products, or something else entirely. Another thing is, how do you know where the highest value opportunity lies? That's a tricky one. that's something you definitely have to consider when you're looking at the different opportunities to kind of improving sustainability. You do have to consider where the highest value is when you're prioritizing your goals. You can't really set about doing everything at once. Organizations just don't work like that. And once you do decide on an initiative, how do you ingrain sustainability into all segments of the business instead of relying on a sustainability team or on just one department? Can you rely on just one department to consider all facets of the business? Is that actually going to be, again, sustainable? So these are just some of the challenges to consider as you develop your sustainability strategy. Moving on to the digital transformation in the context of sustainability. And I think in this slide, we're really going to focus on how technology is your fuel, if you will, your renewable fuel. So the challenge we face is unprecedented. And really, it's a task for coordinated international effort well beyond the scale of any global challenge that humanity has faced to date, and vastly more significant for years and years and centuries and millennia to come. So to begin to even understand how to respond effectively, the key to tackling these challenges is really embedded in organizational digital transformation. For organizations to actually rise to this challenge, they first fundamentally must understand and quantify their impact on the environment, and then and only then how to reverse or mitigate that. So successful implementation of data and AI solutions to tackle climate change will be determined by the extent to which organizations are able to collect, analyze, and manage and act upon their sustainability data in a timely fashion over the next few years. So the first step for organizations will be identifying and collecting this required data. Sort of these new challenges will require the use of brand new data sets, and these could be data sets that organizations may not actually ever have analyzed or collected in that way before. So you can imagine that data ingestion, storage, and then processing will present a pretty major initial hurdle. And the thing is, these aren't the typical data sets that have been used in a lot of the traditional reporting use cases. Plus, in a lot of cases, they can include both internal and external data sets. So you can only imagine the challenge that people are going to have making this data into something usable and meaningful. Just to pull some random kind of examples out of a hat, proverbial hat, these could be internal data sets to identify the packaging. This will be obviously the focus of our webcast, materials in a product, or external data sets like things like kind of finding the carbon equivalent for shipping a product 6 miles on a 6-axle truck. Pretty specific and precise, but definitely a key example. And another thing is that for these reports, the flexibility of data structures is crucial. They need to be able to accommodate the addition of any new data or the editing of any existing data. And this could be things like changes in suppliers as you move towards more sustainable suppliers, or introduction of new retailers, or maybe the extension to new markets. So they're kind of new, but they also need to be flexible, which is a big ask for a lot of organizations. These types of data sets will suffice to provide an initial view, as reporting and disclosure requirements are still being rolled out by governing bodies and regulatory kind of bodies. However, as organizations become more sophisticated at tracking and analyzing their impact, they will need more accurate data at a much higher velocity. The Internet of Things, or the IoT devices, combined with AI, will enable greater sort of pseudo real-time capabilities for tracking and responding at a much greater scale. Needs to be scalable, of course, for a lot of reasons. For example, tracking fuel consumption in real time, or understanding and then varying the current power use of an office building to save energy. The immediate need is going to be the creation of holistic, flexible data platforms that are able to combine these internal and external data sets across a huge variety of different data formats and structures, and also at a range of different velocities. And once these architectures and data platforms are established, there is going to be a huge need for products and applications that can actually use this data to understand and analyze it, and then drive actual action. So Thorogood is actually very proud to have worked with some of the world leading organizations to help build out sustainability data platforms and also the applications that drive action. And I think our aim as an organization, I mean, alongside our own commitments to our own sustainability, is to work and collaborate with such organizations to continue to help them and other organizations, and also the suppliers, the consumers, that they serve, to achieve their sustainability initiatives, a huge driving force for us at the moment. So now we'll just get into some more details about the actual use of data in executing these strategies and also some of the challenges faced by doing that. So we're going to look at some of the actions your organization can take to alleviate some of the data challenges we've looked at. So the first real opportunity is moving from a silo structure to a cooperative model. The tracking and modeling used for sustainability initiatives incorporates data from different departments, as I mentioned previously, which is then pulled into one dataset to formulate a holistic view of the entire organization within the context of sustainability. And the unified data set wouldn't be possible if the data is stored in silos, where it's quite isolated and not easily accessible to everyone. And additionally, all the departments within an organization need to work as equal stakeholders in strategy and in execution in order to actually give that data meaning. Therefore, it's pretty crucial to transition both your data structure and also your organizational structure. I mean, it's a pretty Damascene change, but it's necessary, where departments and their data are all intertwined. So the next executable action is having that end-to-end visibility. So enterprise organizations like, for example, again, CPG companies collect huge amounts of data throughout the product's life cycle, and that's from procurement of the raw materials used to make it and then all the way to consumption by the customer. So reaching ambitious sustainability targets, such as things like having net zero carbon emissions, requires a really granular level of detail from end to end. So again, to use a CPG company as an example, they need to know exactly how much carbon is emitted in each step of the production cycle so that they can kind of pinpoint where that area of the largest emissions is being produced, so that the business can form an effective carbon reduction strategy that can focus on the kind of right parts of the production cycle rather than maybe things that aren't going to be that meaningful in the long run. So finally, your organization can also incorporate external references. So as discussed earlier, this lack of standardization is quite a big challenge in setting and achieving sustainability goals. So it's pretty key to understand the standards that do actually exist now. And of course, they will be developing and rolling out all the time. So you need to keep an eye on that. That's really important. Otherwise, you could be kind of missing those external targets. And you need to incorporate these external sources like reference lists, accepted conversion factors, standardized data sets in your organization strategy and analysis. So you need to kind of bring that external data in to your model within your organization and bring it into that data set, kind of to analyze your own data against that as a point of reference or such. So comparing your organization's internal processes against the stipulations and guidelines of governments and certifying bodies like some of the ones I mentioned earlier is going to be that first step to making sure you're building meaningful progress towards your sustainability initiatives, because you can actually see whether you're kind of living up to those global standards and whether your strategy is making any progress. So that's kind of how data can help out with that. So before you can carry out these actions, there are a few requirements to consider when you're actually going in and choosing the tools and data structures that will support those kind of the progress towards those goals. And firstly, and very importantly, you need scale. End-to-end visibility requires huge amounts of data. This is well into the realm of big data. And your tools need to be able to handle that seamlessly and be able to model it together for the unified data set. So that's, again, a pretty big ask. But secondly, you do need auditability. Regulatory reporting is a really crucial part of achieving sustainability and also setting sustainability initiatives. And it's important that these reports are accurate and precise. And therefore, your data processors do need to allow for auditing of the data so that you're completely certain that the reports are outputting correctly. Otherwise, what's the point, really? Let's look at one of the exciting, in my opinion, solutions to this kind of big ask, as I keep saying. And let's look at what some of these actions actually look like in practice, like sort of the nitty-gritty, if you will. One use case actually involves building a sustainability layer on top of an existing data lakehouse for regulatory reporting. Lakehouses work pretty well for organising sustainability initiatives of enterprises, and they were actually thought up by Databricks, who's a partner of ours. And they originally came up with a concept, and it eliminates a two-layer structure by actually combining the best features of both the data lake and the data warehouses. So, for example, the low-cost storage feature of data lake is kind of combined with the complex functionality of data warehousing. And data can basically be used in analysis services directly from this accessible storage rather than having to be loaded separately. And this really makes them very well suited for big data analytics. You can only imagine the huge wealth of data that comes with sustainability. We've gone into a lot of detail about that. And they're also really good at handling this combination of variable data. So this combination of unstructured data, which can be anything from images to all sorts of sounds, things like that, with structured data, which is your kind of more easy recognizable numerical kind of data. So building a democratized analytical data layer for sustainability insights provides a lot of benefits. And this model delivers a really comprehensive and coherent set of information that details environmental footprint information across business units and functions. So again, bringing in all of those different departments, all of those different kind of traditional data sets into this one holistic model. And it combines very detailed granular data. Again, that data lake capacity of amazing storage is going to help out with that. From different business subsegments, provides an end-to-end view of a life cycle. And the master data lake defines relationships between the data, and then that data can be used to support your decisions on environmental initiatives and just can be used really effectively in those analytical processes where you're considering what your next steps are. So this data structure really benefits the business by providing one universal version of truth in a very, very detailed information model. Again, it just takes these huge quantities of data and really harmonizes them to give you very specific insights that you can then use to make data-driven sustainability decisions, which is obviously a huge buzz term, and not just a buzz term, also a very genuine concept. So I will now hand over to my colleague James, who's going to take you through some of the more specific plastic kind of context to this. Plastic and packaging, that is.
Yeah, so thank you, Natalie. So now what I'll do specifically is look at how we can apply those data and analytics approaches that Natalie's just walked us through there to a specific sustainability solution. And in this example, what we're going to be looking at is plastic and packaging waste reduction. So what does this solution actually do? Well, it helps organizations tackle this problem. So the context for this photo, this isn't a result from a Google or Bing search, but a photo of the beach actually where I intended to propose to my wife. And it's reflective of quite a lot of the beaches across Southeast Asia covered in packaging waste. So you can imagine a pretty rubbish place to try and propose to your wife. In fact, just to the left of this shot, there was a bed floating in the water. And this solution is really aimed at kind of tackling this problem. And organizations such as those that you can see on the screen are working to prevent this from happening. So for reference, everything that I'm showing here is just publicly available information on these organizations' sustainability goals, and you can find it on their websites. But what you can see from the goals is that organizations are not only focusing on reducing plastic waste generally, but more importantly, shifting from the use of certain materials or chemicals, which may be more harmful for the environment. So for example, PET or PVC, so our polyvinyl chlorides. Then to put these into context, they're only a small part of the overall sustainability goals for these organizations. Their goals cover many verticals, across the sustainability spectrum. So both environmental goals like the one we're focusing on today, but also things like social sustainability. So everything from waste reduction, monitoring and addressing greenhouse gases, to diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and much, much more beyond that. But just kind of focusing back to the aims for this solution, we're really focused on waste reduction. So looking at ways that we can increase the recycling of packaging, reduce the use of virgin materials, and going back to my original photo, ultimately remove waste from our beaches and the planet in general. What I thought would be nice to start off with is, I know we've gone through quite a lot of slides so far, is just to look at a demonstration of the solution. And what I've got here is a Power BI application that helps organizations like those that I just showed really work on tackling their sustainability footprint. And what we've done for this solution, I'll come on more to the data after the demo, is combine both sales and forecast information with an understanding of what is in the company's products. So looking at the bill of materials, combining that with our sales and forecast to get an indication of the total packaging waste that we're selling into the market, and looking at that specifically at a country level. What we've also taken are the recycle and recovery rates at a pretty granular level. So plastic polyvinyl chloride in Bangladesh, for example, what is the recycling rate of that? So understanding how much, if we sell, in this organization's case, 309,000 tons of packaging, how much of that is actually waste? So 56,000 tons of waste, and 257,000 tons of that is recycled. So they've clearly been using this solution well to look at how they can reduce their overall footprint. But we're going to help them as part of this demo do more. So we can see here the overall trend of packaging waste, how that's happened from a historic sales perspective, but also looking at the forecast to see we actually have an uptick going forward. And this solution really aims to help organizations find out what is causing the increase in packaging waste. So here we can see most of it is across Southeast Asia, so Southeast Asia and South Asia. So kind of carrying on from the picture I showed earlier. And what I'm able to quite quickly see is that ice cream is by far the biggest contributor to waste packaging. So about 51,000, nearly 52,000 tons of waste. I want to see specifically what that is. So I'm going to use the Power BI functionality to drill through and see what it is within ice cream that's causing packaging waste. And we can see here that it's actually chocolate ice cream, which maybe in some ways is unsurprising. Chocolate ice cream, very popular, but also something that I want to be able to do something about so I can continue having a guilt-free chocolate ice cream experience. So what I'm going to do is drill in and start trying to understand what is it exactly within that chocolate ice cream that is causing this waste. So again, I'll use the drill through functionality in Power BI to go into some detailed footprint analysis. I'm using quite a good visual here called the decomposition tree, which has helped me identify that for that chocolate ice cream, it's the wrapper, so the casing on that product that's causing the issues. If I make some selections here, I can see specifically where that waste is from a geographical perspective. So quite a lot in Bangladesh, quite a lot in India, but also a pretty significant amount in the Philippines and in Vietnam as well. What I want to know specifically though is what is the packaging item. So I'm going to drill into my specific packaging code to see what it is. And I can see we're using 3 different types of packaging specifications within this chocolate ice cream. If I click on those, I can see, okay, that one's specifically related to India, Sri Lanka, and a little bit in Pakistan. This one, quite a lot in Bangladesh, but also quite a lot in the Philippines. And given that photo that I took was in Thailand, I want to focus on this packaging item to see how we can look at reducing the waste. And what we've included is some scenario analysis. So I won't run this during the demo, but you'll be able to get a feel of how it works. So for example, here, we've selected that packaging item that's causing the waste. I can use this kind of filter screen to say, okay, I'm trying to change the case. And for those countries that I've looked at, here are my recycling rates. So for corrugated boxes in Vietnam, 80% recyclability, whereas in Bangladesh, 0%. So I can look at potential different packaging items, so different boxes, different cases, for example, that will allow me to perform some replacements. And the system in this case has identified this packaging item ending in 889. So what we're going to do is do that substitution. And I've already run this analysis. And what you can see is that it actually reduces the total packaging waste. So we've reduced the total packaging to 19,000 tons, so decreasing it in total by 10,000 tons. And we can see the before and after. So there's still a spike through the summer months, again, unsurprising, potentially with chocolate ice cream, but we have made a difference. We have made a reduction. And we can also see that on a geographical basis as well. So reducing the waste in Bangladesh, but also in the Philippines and Vietnam by a slightly smaller amount, probably to do with the recycle rates and some of the volumes that we're selling in as well. But we've still been able to make that tangible impact, and I can build up different scenarios. I could potentially look at different packaging replacements. So, for example, the use of agricultural byproducts and food waste to pack a broad range of different products, or use things like nanoengineering that mimic the use of molecular building blocks in nature to create a different kind of variety of recyclable materials. So I have a lot of options that I can use within this tool to try and reduce that overall packaging waste. So what I wanted to focus on now is really the key behind this solution. So the key to making this solution work is getting the data right. And that's really where the remainder of this solution comes in. So as Natalie kind of highlighted and alluded to earlier, the key challenges that we face with sustainability data are very similar to those when we work with both internal and external data. So specifically for this solution, we have to combine internal data, such as the bill of materials. So knowing that it contains that case, it contains a wooden stick, for example, and so on, which actually isn't as always as easy as it sounds. And that's because quite a lot of this sustainability data hasn't typically been used in anger, and specifically for sustainability use cases. So for example, where we've implemented this for other organizations, we've had to source things like the weight of that casing from third parties, or spent a significant amount of time cleansing the data to get the right weight values and the correct unit of measures. We then need to combine this with external data. So in this case, the recycle and recovery rates that I just showed in the demo, and all of these bring their own unique challenges, such as how do we combine the data, or how do we fill the data where we have things like complex recycling mechanisms. So in different countries, we know there are different recycle rates that are applicable to certain products and so on. So then how do we actually get that data? How do we schedule the delivery? What cadence does it come in? At what granularity does it come in? And so on. So we need to really be able to tackle those challenges. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do is create a cohesive data model for the packaging solution. So like the conceptual model that I'm showing on the screen now. And this is really the business-focused blueprint of how to combine that bill of materials with the sales and forecast information even to understand that total footprint. Then using those additional data sets, such as the recycle rates, to understand the recovery of this footprint. Then combining this with organizational targets to understand performance and ultimately the alignment to the global goals that Natalie discussed earlier. We build this model out using that lake house approach that was discussed earlier as well. So working from left to right, the pattern enables us to deal with the complex ingestion of data from both those internal systems, but also the external sources as well. And the real key addition to this is handling that manual and external data where we know some of the data quality will be questionable. So on the left, we have the mechanism to ingest that manual data and also apply complex data quality rules when we load the data into the platform. We also have the ability to directly integrate with certain sustainability software as a service platforms to supplement that data in the platform. So it could be those recycle rates, or it could be carbon equivalents when we're looking at doing life cycle analysis. Next, we use Databricks and that lakehouse pattern that Natalie highlighted to transform and model the data into that business-focused view that I just showed, and ultimately surface that via our semantic mechanism of choice, in this example, Synapse Analytics or Azure SQL database. And then finally, that information is surfaced in a reporting tool of choice. In this case, and in the demo, I use Power BI. So finally, what I wanted to talk through are the next steps, but hopefully it's clear from the background that we went through at the beginning to the solution that it's clear that we have to take action and take action quickly. And what I'm sharing now is our path to getting started to help you guys take action. And this is an approach that we've used with a number of organizations. So it starts by identifying the best opportunities, and ultimately that will be different for each organization, but it's certainly the starting point, whether it's gearing up for regulatory reporting requirements, understanding your emissions or your carbon emissions, or reducing packaging waste. This is really the first step in highlighting and recognizing the challenges. We follow this with an initiation workshop, and then we use this to identify the first data and AI initiative to work on. From here, we start developing the solution to prove value. So typically a 4 to 6 week engagement that will map out the different data sets that are needed, the velocity of that data required to tackle the business goal, and then develop an end-to-end proof of value that can be shared with the business to provide that initial insight. Once the value is proved, we moved into the operationalization and delivery, scaling these solutions across markets and products to tackle sustainability challenges at that global level. And then to accelerate this, we use our proven toolkit that combines our experience delivering data analytics solutions across the sustainability space. With that Azure architecture pattern I showed earlier that has been successfully used across a number of enterprise customers, to understanding of the data, not just those challenges that I identified, but also what data is required and from where. Then the Power BI templates used in conjunction with the data transformation templates, manual data ingestion tools, and the data models that are required to get this out to the organization. So if any of this is of interest, then please do feel free to reach out to us. So with that, I will say thank you for attending today's session and have a good rest of your day.